Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. I'm a summer camp director, writer, and speaker, and I've had the privilege of working with thousands of children, teenagers, young adult counselors, and parents over the past 3 decades. My husband, Steve, and I are raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 15 to 25. So my interest in raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults is personal as well as professional. In episode 65, I'm chatting with Mary Hofstedt. She is the Community Education Director at Challenge Success. Challenge Success is a nonprofit organization affiliated with the Stanford University Graduate School of Education. Challenge Success partners with schools, families, and communities to embrace a broader definition of success and to implement research-based strategies that promote student well-being and engagement while learning. In Mary's role as the Community Education Director, she coaches Challenge Success partner schools as they strive to advance student well-being and engagement. For notes, links, and other information about this episode, visit my website at sunshine-parenting.com and search for episode 65. I hope you enjoy hearing about Challenge Success. Well, I'm thrilled today to have Mary Hofstedt on the podcast. She is with Challenge Success, an organization that I have been following for many years and just really, really love the work they're doing and the education they're providing to parents and teachers. So, Mary, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sure. It's just so glad this worked out for you to come. I got to hear you live speaking recently, and then I got to see you again when I came up to the Wendy Mogul talk. So this is fun. This is our 3rd time seeing each other in a month. Why don't you start just introducing yourself and just telling a little bit about your background and how you ended up at Challenge Success?
Okay, so I am, first of all, a parent, and I have a 19-year-old son who just headed off to college, and we are in that transitional phase with him and with us as a family. And I also have 2 stepchildren who are 15 and 17, and so have the blended family situation, so lots of teens in my life right now, and have known about Challenge Success since its founding, really. I was a graduate student when I got to know Denise, one of our founders, and was very interested even then in different types of pathways, having this broad definition of what it means to be a successful person and looking at education from that lens, and took a very non-traditional educational pathway myself. So went the community college route and into 4-year, and then went back to graduate school a little bit later. And so just have seen kind of firsthand that you can travel kind of a different type of pathway and have terrific outcomes and be a thriving adult and a parent and so I kind of live and believe in our mission really, really deeply, which is about, at its core, about valuing engagement over performance for our kids, and also seeing them as they are, and that there are a lot of different ways to be successful and to thrive in the world. And trying my hardest to do that as a parent. It is not always graceful, and also, wanting to help schools do that through Challenge Success also for kids. So, and with kids are also our partners in this work.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. They need to be part of it. What kind of graduate school did you attend? What's your degree in?
So I went to, and I'm always very careful. So Challenge Success, when we talk about broadening the definition of success, you'll see if you go to our website, we don't list any of our credentials.
Okay.
But I did, so I will say my community college was Richland Community College in Dallas. And then I was at SMU for undergrad, Southern Methodist University, studying art. And then I went to graduate school at Stanford, which is where I met Denise, to study social sciences in education.
Awesome. Well, that's so good. I know it is kind of funny that Challenge Success is based at Stanford.
Yes, it is.
I
And
kind of, when I went to the talk there, because I don't know if you know that I went to Stanford too,
okay.
undergraduate. And I really, like you, I mean, it's funny with my kids, I really did not, it wasn't really in the conversation for them to go there
Yeah.
for many reasons. But I'm like you, it actually, my time at summer camp during college was much more meaningful to me
Mm.
as a person and my development, and kind of steered my path much more than my actual traditional education. So I too feel like I kind of did a different path, even though when you look at it on paper, it might look very similar to what other people have done. So tell me, how long of a gap did you have? Like you said, you went back to graduate school later. How long, like, how did that
I was the mother of a 3-year-old when I
work?
went back
Okay.
to grad school. So was living in family student housing and had been working in education and nonprofit sector for 10 years when I went back. So had a lot of experience. And by the time I went back, there's something about being a little bit older and back in graduate school that you feel like you won the lottery.
Oh
You're like, are you
my gosh.
kidding me? I get to just study all day and think about things. And it's also this reminder, when we talk about kids and high school and college, my other reflection in grad school was this was not my high school experience. This was not my college experience necessarily until toward the end. And it became very passionate about going back and working with kids, younger kids, around those engagement questions.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I think we owe it to them, and we know so much about youth development now and brain science and what engages kids. And there's more we can do.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I reflect back a lot. I actually did a similar thing, but probably much later than you. I went back and got my master's in psychology when I was 45. When my kids were leaving, my older kids were leaving
Okay, I
for
love
college.
that.
They were leaving for college, and I was jealous when they were signing up for classes and going through the guide. And I went to, I live in the Fresno area. I went to Fresno State, and I was so engaged, such a nerdy, loving every reading. I got to research my own topic because it was a research-based psychology master's. And so reading all the literature review was all about kids and social skills. And I was like, couldn't get enough of this. And I'm thinking back to my college years where, reading was a drudgery, and
Right.
couldn't really figure out what I really wanted to major in. And I mean, it's so sad to look back that, they often say like whatever, college is wasted on the youth or whatever, but
Right.
I was not engaged. And I see my kids being so much more,
Mm.
I don't know, in tune with themselves at their age and maybe that's because we're all learning more. But let's switch gears. Tell me about, so
Yeah.
Challenge Success, how long have you been at Challenge Success, and what is the work that you're all doing there?
So I have been there for about a year and a half at this point, but have been involved for over 10 in a variety of consulting roles. So I've always had kind of, my finger in the mix and have loved the work. So feel really lucky to have been here in the parent ed and school support role for the past year and a half. And so Challenge Success, I mean, just to tell a quick origin story. So back in all of us now adults being in school, when Denise Pope, one of our founders, was in grad school, she was working on her dissertation in education and was studying student engagement. And so she shadowed 5 kids for a full year, carried the backpack, did the whole thing, had a locker, went to all their classes. And these were kids that had all been identified by the schools as being really engaged in school. And so she was excited to learn about what makes kids engaged and what are the characteristics, and basically found over the course of her year that none of the kids she was shadowing were engaged. They were all doing school, raising their hands in classes, not because they knew the answer or had something to say, but because of the participation grade. Cheating because they were so busy, whether it was working after school or doing tons of extracurriculars, that they didn't feel like they had a choice, having headaches, stomach aches. And so she wrote a book out of her dissertation called Doing School, and each of the chapters was written with one of the students she shadowed. So really bringing in the student voice piece from the very beginning. And the dissertation and book got picked up by people on college campuses and high schools that said, we're seeing the effects of this in the kids that show up in college, and we have to do something. They're not resilient, they're burned out by the time they get to college. And what we care about is kids learning and being healthy contributors to society, and we're doing the opposite. And so that's what Challenge Success grew out of, was the need for a solution and for strategies to address some of these issues she saw in that work. And so, fast forward 15 years, we've, worked very deeply with schools all over the country, primarily middle and high schools, to help teams of people. So the schools that come in and work with us for a year all bring administrators, teachers, parents, students, counselors together in teams to say, what are the root causes of the unhealthy forms of stress our kids are experiencing? And what can we do in practice and policy in our school to more deeply understand the student experience and to make lasting change that's going to really help the kids to be more engaged and hold these broader definitions of what success means, to include well-being, to include deep learning, to include health. And so we do that work. We also have a survey tool that schools can use to really understand what's happening for students and help target their interventions. And we do talks and parent education and research, through our survey, and then literature reviews and things to help families and schools really tackle these issues from a research-based perspective.
Oh, I just love that. How many schools are you working with now?
So this year's cohort of schools is 50 strong,
Wow.
which is a lot, and they're from all over. And they come together for 2 conferences a year and then work with us in between on their action plans. And over the course of the 15 years, I think we've had 350 plus.
And think of all the lives that have been positively impacted by that. Well, I just, as a side note, my son is at one of the schools, which is where I heard you speak.
Right.
And I just have to say, as a parent, here's my son. And I know just from what I've read is boys traditionally are even less engaged and less interested in school because of the setup and everything. And he's an example of one of those that, in elementary school, had a couple of great years with he had a couple of male teachers who he loved. He really got boys. And he had some times where he was really engaged and interested. And then middle school was pretty much a disaster for him. He was just constantly saying how much he didn't like school, boredom, just not the opposite of engaged. And this is what led us to looking for something different. And I mean, when I heard that his new school was partnering and doing the Challenge Success, I was like, hallelujah. I couldn't be happier. He's one of those teens that is terrible in the morning, needs, I would make him go to bed at 10 because you need your 9 hours or whatever.
Yeah, yay, mom, 9.25 according to Bill Dement at Stanford.
But he would just be lying wide awake in bed because he wasn't tired yet. His little clock wasn't ready. Yeah. Anyway, so just even that simple switch that, of just a later start is huge. And that's one of the things that you do. So actually, let's talk about that since we got on the topic. You have some really great, very straightforward research-based recommendations for parents. And one of them is about sleep. So let's talk about that because I think this is one of the biggest reasons. Well, personally, I think it's one of the biggest reasons that kids and parents are so unhappy a lot of the time and stressed out is because people are not getting enough sleep. So what are you finding? What are you finding improves when people get more sleep?
So just let me talk a little bit about what we're seeing in students across the country. What we know and what we just talked about is kids need at the high school level between 8 and 10 hours of sleep a night. And that is, and what the Stanford Sleep Center would say is it's 9.25 hours a night. And we've surveyed over 140,000 kids across the country in middle and high school. And the average amount of sleep we're seeing at the high school level is 6.7 hours a night.
Oh my gosh.
And
so
it's
2.5 hours short.
2.5 hours short. And that means, and that's the average. So we know some kids are getting more, but some kids are getting a lot less than that. And we know there are huge consequences. There's so much research now on sleep in terms of its bilateral relationship to depression and anxiety, to all kinds of health outcomes. It's linked to obesity, to our immunity being lower. It's like every bad thing that you can imagine. And even driving, we think about our teens and driving. Drowsy people have the equivalent of the 0.08 blood alcohol level, which is illegal in a lot of states as a blood alcohol level for driving, and yet we're out there on the roads.
Right.
And so in some places, part of the schools moving the late start time is not just about the circadian rhythms for the kids, because they need that, their sleep has shifted that direction. And also kids aren't on the roads early in the morning after having been up studying until midnight and not having had enough sleep. So it's sleep is so important to our overall health, to our well-being. And one of the things we work with schools on and families is I think we can tend to, let me just talk about parents. Your kid will say, "Oh, I've got to be up. I've got this huge project due tomorrow, or I'm cramming for the test," and we want to let that slide and say, "Okay, go ahead and stay up." And the best thing in the world to do for their learning, for their memory, for all that work our brains do in sleep is to go to bed and let that information consolidate. And if anything, get up a little bit earlier in the morning, but go to sleep. And that gets, I think, curtailed in our current system with kids and families trying to do too much.
Yeah. Well, when they just, I think that's so true. So now, what are you finding when schools do make some changes to start later? Are they seeing benefits in the kids?
There are, and I would need to go back and look at what the studies are. I think there's definitely research that shows short-term gains. There's some that shows after a few years it can slide back. So it's a little bit mixed in terms of the research, but the late start times, California just tried to pass.
I know, yeah.
Statewide, that didn't make it, of course, but it's definitely aligned with what we know about adolescent development and adolescent needs. And there are things schools can do systemically to support that, so the kids don't just, adjust an hour later and still get as little sleep. That has to happen in combination with thinking about load.
Right.
And scheduling overall.
Right. It's interesting because I think it was last year or a year and a half ago, I interviewed Jess Shatkin. He wrote a book about the teenage brain and sort of, I can't remember the name, but it's about their need for risk or something like that. And what he was saying is that not only would it be better for school to start later, but for school to have like more of the extracurricular / homework built into the afternoon, because so many of the dangerous behaviors that kids who aren't involved in sports do tends to be in those afternoon hours. So, if kids are getting out of school at 2:00 and their parents aren't home from work till 6, and you don't get a babysitter for a 15 or 16-year-old, and they don't do a sport or any kind of thing like that, it's a dangerous time for kids in terms of like drug use and sex and all that stuff. So when I was really interesting, just like rethinking our cultural view of what the school day should be, maybe it is more like a work day, but you're done when you're done. Like how great would it be is if your kids sort of, I don't even know if had study hall or whatever, but when they're done and like off the clock at 5 or 6, they're done and they get to be with the family and have dinner and read a book if they feel like it or whatever. It's just we have to really rethink the whole picture, it seems like.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there's some different directions to go with how we think about risk. I think, and parenting too. I mean, there's this desire to minimize risk to the point of kids not having any kind of safe or healthy risk. And in terms of failure, kind of I know Madeline Levine, one of our co-founders, does not like the word failure, because who as a parent wants to, I'm going to let my kid fail a bunch. It's more, the making mistakes, recovery, those opportunities, trying things out, and balancing those kind of healthy risk-taking activities and creating space for those through trying things out, and to choice. So there's this gap after school that is potentially also an opportunity for some downtime, for some
Yes.
self-directed play,
True.
for not just the flex time of getting things done before you're trying to do them at 10 o'clock at night
Right.
because you've got such a packed day. But also, the Ken Ginsberg, a pediatrician, talks about, kids need time in adolescence in particular to answer the questions, who am I? Where do I belong? Am I normal? And what are the spaces in their lives that aren't filled, that, they're not necessarily out like, doing drugs and having sex and
Right. True.
going rogue, but have these spaces to really reflect. And so it's this balance of how are we building in reflective spaces and downtime, not just sleep, but also daydream time and quiet time and nap time and time to, be on the couch listening to music and not having anywhere to do and, anywhere to be, that we need to protect for our kids too. And that's part of our playtime, downtime, family time mantra for families, because we know those are really important protective factors that help kids thrive long term.
Yeah, I love the resource you have, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes for the PDF. It's easy to remember, and it stands for playtime, downtime, and family time. So those are the things that you have found through your research at Challenge Success, just increase like well-being and resilience in kids. What do those look like? What does that mean? Like, what does playtime mean, downtime, and family time?
So playtime means activities that are freely chosen, kind of intrinsically motivated and personally directed. So like an adult-led soccer game is, even though they're playing, it wouldn't count as playtime. So these are things that, like, if your child is sitting down and playing the piano just for fun, not because they're preparing for a recital or something, that's playtime. It's that space. So like when our kids are really little, and they get the present with that comes in the box, and they're way more interested in the box, and soon the box is a fort or a veterinary clinic or, whatever it is. That's the kind of space we don't want our teens to lose either. And that can happen for some kids in maker spaces, or some kids are doing their own YouTube shows, or, whatever that is, tinkering in some way. But we want to create that tinkering space for our teens, or even just going out and shooting hoops. I mean, get outside, plug for camp here.
Yeah.
Camp is, this is why camp is so great. And your work with camp, because it's that time where there's this choice piece in camp that's rooted in play and connection with others. And so that's the part of play that's so important,
Yeah, when you were talking about the whole like reflection time and all that, I was thinking about camp, because what I know that is what we want for our kids, but I will just say from my observation of the kids that my own kids and the kids that I work with, when they're not at camp, it just seems to me that their devices are so ubiquitous that, while you'd like to say, oh yeah, they need downtime and relaxing time and you want to let them just chill or whatever, their default is they're on their screen doing something. And like you said, if they're creating a YouTube video or they're chatting with a friend on FaceTime, that's one thing. But a lot of it is just this passive kind of it's not really creative. It's not really like filling them up, I don't think. And at camp, like you said, it's interesting. There is built-in reflection time. There's built-in rest time. There's lots of built-in free play time. Some kids might play cards. Other kids might be throwing a frisbee. Other kids might just be sitting and reading or relaxing. And it's like, it's the environment. And this, to me, especially when kids are young, since adults aren't very good at it, I feel like we need to set up these cultures in our schools and in our homes that just have that built in, where you can just say to your kids, oh, you know what, this is just our whatever, this is free time, but we're putting away our screens. I mean, honestly, and this, even if it's just for an hour, and find something else. Do you want to, whatever you want to do, you can go outside, you can draw, you can, play the piano, whatever. But I feel like we have to have some kind of boundaries around the screens, because to me, that takes away from that playtime, that real playtime that you describe.
I agree. And I think I love that you distinguish between the passive and the active. Like, the devices are not all bad. There could be these creative elements of an engagement in them. And I love the idea of saying, we're going to put everything away and this is our playtime hour for the family. And if your kid says, which mine would and did, I'm so bored, great. That's when they figure out what to do with the boredom. But to like have that experience is super important.
Yeah. So
Sorry, I'm ringing. Okay.
it's okay. Okay, so then I guess the final thing, I mean, this has been so great because I think you've kind of summed up some of the things, but I'm definitely going to send people to the Challenge Success website to get all of your resources and your white paper that you just published. And what's the
Yes.
name of the new book, Denise's new book?
Her Overloaded and Underprepared
Yeah, and I
is
need
our
to,
newest one.
and that's the newest one, and I have not read it yet, but oh my gosh, just the title alone is just, that is what describes what we're doing to kids right now, overloading them and then not preparing them for what they need to be doing in life. So I love the work that you're doing.
And that's a great one to, pick up. And if, someone's out of school and wants to start a conversation to give to, a like-minded administrator or, somebody just to say, let's start having this conversation as a school. And what might this look like? And just want to say one more thing about the devices piece too, because that's like a whole, year-long series of podcasts on technology, but related to sleep and how important sleep is. We know, the blue light impacts sleep, and the recommendation is to get devices out of bedrooms, and for all of us, for our family. And if the kid says, no, you can't possibly, we're the parents, we can, and to set some boundaries around that piece too. So a half hour to an hour before bed, no devices is the recommendation. So
yeah, it's so funny. I can't even tell you how many times that's come up with all different people I've interviewed on the podcast. But how many people actually follow through on it? I do. I plug my phone in. I have an office at home and I plug it in there. And that's where I have any kids who are still left at home. That's where they're required to plug theirs in as well. But you know what I find is hard at college, they get used to having it in their room.
Yep.
And so the habits are being established quite early that, the kids, they check their phones in bed. And I think a lot of adults do that too. So at the very least, if you are stuck with it in your room, like in a dorm, at least kids could put it on do not disturb until 7 a.m. or whatever time they're getting up, because it's a real problem how addicted we all are. And I feel it too. You get drawn in, and once that thing is in front of you, you lose track of time. And instead of doing something that you planned on doing or wanted to do, I don't know what you're doing. It's like, what did I just do for a half an hour or whatever? So I've been really compelled by just thinking about letting devices work for us and the tools that they are as a way to communicate and connect, and not letting them rule us.
Yep. That's the intent. And it's interesting to see the folks from the tech industry in Silicon Valley coming out and talking about the intentionality around the addiction that's built into them. And, it takes work, and things like device-free dinners, central docking stations, when kids are home. I love the device-free play hour or activities, and it's being really intentional about that as a family, I think, is really important.
Definitely. Well, Mary, this has been so great. And I know my listeners are going to enjoy hearing all about the work you guys are doing at Challenge Success. Where can people find all of the great resources that you have?
It is all on our website, including the new paper about college fit over rankings, and it's at challengesuccess.org.
Okay, awesome. And then I like to end with the question, just for you as a parent and as a Challenge Success researcher and worker, what is one thing that you could recommend to parents who want to raise kids who become thriving adults?
So this has been the hardest thing for me as a parent, and it's counterintuitive, but to love the child in front of you exactly as they are, and to let go as much as possible of all of these social messages and pressures that get thrown at us as parents, and to really trust our gut, and to really see the individual kid, their interests, their edges, their growth opportunities, their strengths, regardless of where they are in kind of the traditional model of success or not. And that's what I always try to come back to, particularly when my son is driving me crazy, is how do I love the person in front of me? How do I listen deeply? How do I ask questions and be curious about who he is and who he's becoming, and create space for PDF.
Oh, that is just beautiful. So we're going to end there. Thank you so much for being on today. This was just a fun conversation. I'd love to do it again sometime.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so happy to be connected with Mary Hofstedt and the Challenge Success organization, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about the great work they're doing there. For notes and links to all the resources that Mary and I talked about, visit my website and search for episode 65. If you enjoy this podcast, I would love it if you would take a moment to subscribe to my weekly email where I share all kinds of resources to help us raise kids who become thriving adults. If you're so inclined, I'd also really appreciate you taking the time to give me a rating and review on iTunes. That will help other people find this podcast. I'll end this episode with a quote from Josh Shipp. Every child is one caring adult away from being a success story.
This podcast is a proud member of Parents on Demand, a network of high-quality shows for families just like yours. Download our free network app on Apple and Android and listen to your favorite episodes on the go.